One of the biggest problem of our age is how do we age in place optimally without burdening the system, living life to the fullest. That's a problem that you start perceiving, in your 40s and plus, when it's usually not the time you start companies anymore. And so there's this like generational disconnect between builders and the problems that they're trying to solve. And so, my thinking is that what if we were to expose young people to, the coolness of what this building in health means, patient center, patient owned, like talk about agency and ownership of your own data, but also the cool things that you can do if you can control your data.
Hi, I'm Gaia Salizzoni, and this is Unfiltered Health, a space where we explore how healthcare in Europe is evolving through the insights and experiences of those shaping it. Today, I'm thrilled to have Luca Foschini with us, a digital health pioneer who co-founded Evidation Health, turning it into a unicorn, and is now the president of Sage and a startup investor. We'll explore how data is revolutionizing healthcare, the role of technology in patient engagement, and the future of AI in medicine. Let's start. Hi, Luca. I'm very happy that you're joining me here today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I'm very excited to talk to you because I've been knowing you for a while now, and I know you have a lot of experience in many things, and you're very keen on some topics that I really care about. And also, someone would say you are one of the ones that made it, that made a unicorn in health, which is even more difficult. So I'm sure that you have a lot of learnings to share with prospect founders or even just people in innovation. I would like to start from your very beginning. So your early career and studies, just because I think, especially in your case, were very much the foundation of what you just became later. So I saw that you studied engineering, you studied first in Italy and then you moved to the States. And I have a lot of questions about that later. But I've also read that you started being into tech, like pure tech and IT, when you were like 18 or even before. I've read something about some IT Olympiads when you were super young. So if you go back then, and if you're in the mind of Luca, 18 years old Luca, what were you thinking? Like, were you just passionate about it and you had no clue where this would lead you? Or was it like you had a project already in your mind?
No, I had no project, no idea. I still don't to this day. And some of the most successful people I know still don't to their, 50s and 60s. Yeah, I think a lot of successful people I know really intentionally avoid self-coercion into planning to maybe explore. And obviously, not everyone can do that. You have to have the resources, the time, and etc. But I think sometimes planning is a bit overrated. In maybe like very long-term horizons, it's definitely necessary in our organization. Failing to plan is planning to fail, like they say, and I absolutely agree with that. If we're talking about financial and year over year, but if you talk about life plan, where life is more of a journey, like do you want to really plan your journey that much? That's gonna make it a little less interesting. So I had no plan. I still have a lot of lack of planning at this point on longer term. And my story is one that has stayed with me a lot in terms of what does it mean to stumble on your future, and how can we make this stumbling more intentional, or at least something that people are aware and can choose to pursue or not pursue intentionally, is something that I've been thinking about and trying to work along those lines. I grew up in a very small town in Emilia-Romagna and grew up as a farmer. My dad is a farmer. Like we had a farm, and but that's our main occupation. You have a lot of people here in the United States that are farmers, but it really means they have a garden. But no, our
Real
main
farmers.
source of sustainability was the farm. And I've been the first one in my family not to go to college, not to finish high school, but to start high school. And so the reality I come from is a very rural reality with, lots of smart people around me, but not educated, right? Like street smart kind of thinking. Incredible tinker. Like my family has a tradition of building their own farming machines. My dad has built a conveyor belt mechanized that can help when you're picking peaches as an adaptation of a tractor that, we see them today, but like he built it 40 years ago, right? Like,
So the mindset was there.
The mindset was
something.
there as a tinker, but there was never a path to education or even know what education beyond high school means. And I had the sheer luck of stumbling upon this thing that's called Olympiads in informatics. If you remember your high school time, you might have seen Olympiads in mathematics or Olympiads in physics. Olympiads in informatics is pretty much the same things, but instead of proving theorems on papers, you have to write code that solves problem. And this
Hmm.
code is then tested on a machine that you have no access to, and given some inputs, it needs to give the correct output. Like an example could be you're given a list of objects that you have to fit in a box. You have many, many objects. You given the size of the box, and you need to pick the minimum amount of objects that fit in a box and maximizes the weight, the total amount of weight that you can carry in that box. And so you have to think about, oh, okay, how do I write an algorithm that scans through the items and selects this set that has minimum that fits in there but has maximum weight? And that's just an example of the problem you might be getting there.
And how did you happen to know how to code at 18 years old back then?
Okay, so that's another foresight of my family of non-educated but street smart and tinker. My dad, when I was 12, bought me a secondhand Amstrad 286 computer, which was already old by the time I was 12, and you could do barely nothing on it except for running this thing that's called QBasic, which is an editor where you can program. And then I could start
Wow.
write my video games and actually edit video games that were already there. The famous one is Gorilla, like the one that there are two gorillas on two mountains that have to, take down each other, throwing a banana. And so it was so much fun trying to change the constant of gravity so the banana would fall faster or could fly higher. Changing the game you can play, it felt incredibly empowering as a kid. And then like building my own games, I built a Forza 4, like a Connect 4, with an AI that would play against you. And that's, I had that was a really fun time of my life. So yeah, I got to high school that I know how to program. I was really some of the very few. And
I can
then
imagine that.
yeah. And then I could participate in this contest and then, won the school, province, region, and then eventually national competition. And then I went abroad to represent Italy in the international level of this contest. Didn't do very well there. Ranked just below half middle of the ranking. Missed a medal. Like the first half of the ranking gets a medal. I missed it by a few points, which was devastating at that time. And looking back at it, I laugh. But, it was a really hard time to, go from like being really good at something and then playing with the best in the world and realizing that you are not that good at that thing was just a lesson of humility that I'm happy now that I got early on.
I mean, what they say is just being the smartest in the room is not the best, right? So you were the example of that, I guess.
Yeah, but then you get catapulted into a room where you're the dumbest in the room, and that also not great to
That's
feel.
not ideal, probably. I'm always thinking about the opportunity as well that you called stumbling upon opportunities, but I'm always wondering what's the balance between luck, because you also mentioned luck, and catching that opportunity, and I feel like what you just described is both things. Like one doesn't exist without the other in success or whatever we want to call it.
Yeah. I mean, I've always been very open and curious to try out things, but then I think I had immense luck over time that gave me this opportunity to try out. Because to get to your original question, how did I get here? Well, from the Olympiads, then you get put in a room with the top 20 people in Italy that are going to get trained to go play the international phase, and only 4 of them get selected. I got selected twice and then stayed as a coach for the years after. You're in a room with people that are university researchers. And so you learn, I could do research at the university and be paid for it? Okay, now university is on my map. It wasn't before, it is now. And then all other folks that were doing all these Olympiads, they were going to Normale and Sant'Anna at Pisa. Normale is for the more theoretical sciences, and math and philosophy and physics. Sant'Anna is the applied sciences, engineering, economics, and agriculture. And then you have full room and board. Okay, so for a kid without a lot of means that makes a difference between going and not going to the university. So let's try to get into Sant'Anna. I got into Sant'Anna. And now you are among the people that later on are going abroad. They're going to Erasmus. They're going to the United States. They're going to these other places. And so I kept following the flow. And that's how I ended up here.
So it's one opportunity unlocking the others. But again, I'm very strongly opinionated on the fact that you have to catch those opportunities. And if some people think about it, maybe they did have the same opportunities and they just didn't catch them. So I think it's also merit, is not just luck, for sure. It's curious because like I'm just getting out of the topic a bit, but I just feel like in your case, probably exposing yourself to examples in front of you of what could be next was ideal for you to choose what was next, right?
That is 100% correct. Like you can't be what you can't see, right? Like the famous quote um, that we hear so much, at least here in the United States, and it's so true. And that's one of the reasons why I've tried to start a course of digital health for Italian high school, where you can get that exposure earlier, and you can get exposure to the cool part of medicine. So like one of the things, I don't know if we're gonna get there, but like one of my big chagrins is that the young does not care about health on average, right? Like it's just nature, right? Like the young is healthy, and so if I'm 20, what do I care about? My friends. So I go out and build a company, build a social network. Makes sense,
Makes
right?
sense.
Like you're solving problems that are close to you. There's nothing bad about that. But one of the biggest problem of our age is how do we age in place optimally without burdening the system, living life to the fullest. That's a problem that you start perceiving, in your 40s and plus, when it's usually not the time you start companies anymore. And so there's this like generational disconnect between builders and the problems that they're trying to solve. And so, my thinking is that what if we were to expose young people to, the coolness of what this building in health means, patient center, patient owned, like talk about agency and ownership of your own data, but also the cool things that you can do if you can control your data. Some of the demos that I give during these classes are, hey, this is how you do an ECG from your Apple Watch and then extract that data and analyze it in Python and see all these like cool metrics about your HRV, which is a measure of stress. And these are all things that, you have on your wrist. And so that's exciting, right? Like that's not the hospital I don't want to even think about, or where my grandpa is. And so maybe my hope is that will get younger people close to thinking about problems in health through this connection with, technology, coolness factor, apps, AI, whatever buzzword you want to put in there that is topical at the moment. I think it will help.
I totally agree with that. And the other day I had a huge conversation with some people about why are people just not paying for health? And of course, the paying factor is another big topic, especially in Europe, where we are used to have public healthcare that is covered. And so we don't actually see the price and therefore the cost and therefore the value of healthcare. I remember I heard your speech at the Italian Tech Week last September, and you said that tech and healthcare are very different and move at different levels, and that's part of the problem. But at the same time, they have one very important thing in common, is that they both need time to be built. So they are built over time through the habits of people. And with that, I just wanted to jump to what you built, which is Evidation Health, which, if I'm not wrong, you led for more than 10 years. So you co-founded it and then you led for more than 10 years, and you bring it to become one of the healthcare unicorns in the States. I'm not going to ask you how you did it, because that would be an entire podcast probably, but how did you get there? Like, not really to the unicorn status, but how did you start Evidation Health? What was the trigger?
Yeah, well, first of all, I didn't do it alone. I'm one of the 4 co-founders, and I was founding chief data scientist there. So I was more on the technical side and on the data analysis piece. And I was head of R&D there from founding to a couple of years ago when I left to go lead a different organization. I would love to tell you a little bit about that. And still, very connected with the organization and in love with the mission. They're doing great. And I just needed to go solve a problem at the root of even what Evidation is trying to solve, which is access to medical data. But Evidation it started in 2012 when the Fitbits were starting being around. Not even the bracelet one, the one that you put in your hip. I don't know if you remember or you've ever seen
Not
one of
really.
those.
Not
Yeah,
really.
there was a original one. You will put in your hip and it will count steps. As an engineer and a computer scientist, that was really appealing to me because one, I had background in how to process data coming from sensors very efficiently. That's just part of my PhD in computer science that I did here at UCSB in Santa Barbara. And the other one is just that I was part of a group that's still going on that's called the Quantified Self. So it's a bunch of biohackers, mostly Bay Area based, that are interested in self-experimentation and measuring everything about their own body to maximize performance or understand if there's some symptoms that they want to better understand. They're kind of like the do-it-yourself, the DIY of the medical world. So capitalizing on that movement that was happening, and then this data that was becoming available for any patient could have their Fitbit and started to ask questions about how can I improve my steps? Are more steps better for my health or fewer? That we saw an opportunity to say, can we help patients be more intentional and data-driven in the management of their health? So the very initial idea was like, hey, let's build an app where people can import data from their Fitbit or their Garmin. There were like a few that were starting coming out, and we were like, 5 years from now, there's going to be a whole ecosystem of wearables. So we need to be ready. We want to be the app that rules them all. Mm-hmm. And for some time we were like that. And then we quickly realized that it's really hard to keep people engaged in the health space, because health is not engaging by definition. Again, health is something that you don't want to think about. Like, you just want it to be okay. You don't want to do anything about that. And so then we went to the rabbit hole of like, how do we keep people using our app? And so the whole gamification and point system that still is the backbone of the My Evidation app this day was born. Like, what is the value that you can return day after day, and that's a proxy value, in our opinion, as behavioral economists call it, which is points. These points can be redeemed for cash, not a lot of cash, or can be sent to charity, but that doesn't matter. It's really not the monetary value that engage folks. It's more the idea that there's some sort of accrual of value that becomes conspicuous and visible to you in the form of points that keeps you coming back.
Yeah, psychologically, it's just something concrete you get out of it.
That's
basically.
Right. That's right. That's right. And not to go into a tangent that could be its own podcast, but I think that's also a very deep connection to the question you asked earlier, why people don't pay for health. We paid for, and we're still paying, and Evidation still pays to have user engaged. It's actually like the app is almost like a center of cost, and the business model comes from something else that we'll talk about in a second, because it's not really ingrained in the mind of folks that you pay for something that might or might not realize in 10 to 20 years from now in a way that you might not ever be able to perceive or causally reconnect back to the action that you made. If you think about the most powerful preventative action that we can do, which is get vaccinated against terrible diseases that have killed millions of people around the world, and for which we have strong evidence that the vaccination is effectiveness through multiple clinical trials from independent bodies, etc., that is still questioned by a lot of people, right? Like that basic assumption of preventative health is still questioned by a lot of people. So how do you expect that then someone might actually want to pay for something that is a lot more uncertain? Like, hey, if you go for a walk, you breathe fresh air, 20 years from now, you're not going to have cancer. Like, nobody's going to do that, right? Like if you question, right? Like it just doesn't click. So like we're not made intellectually to have that kind of leap and being able to integrate that kind of evidence over decades of time frame. So I think it's gonna be really hard to directly show value and get people to pay in a Spotify model, right? Like $10 a month and you get an unlimited stream of music in health. I've seen glimpses here and there, but it's a fundamentally hard problem because preventative does not realize value immediately. And so it's hard to pay for that.
Can I ask you something specific about that? Because one thing is about tangibility. So I agree, like you can't see it, you can't touch it, you don't have it in your mind. As you say, the psychological trick doesn't do the trick. But I'm wondering if there's also a social factor to it in a world where we do a lot of things because of what the others think and about what we can show to the others. I'm just thinking if there's also a social component of not being able to show that your health is good or that you're doing something for your health.
I mean, definitely social pressure can do a lot. And we did a lot of studies at the beginning of Evidation looking at really like the behavioral economics lens of what your social network can compel you to do or not to do, like showing progress, for example, like having a budding systems where you have accountability to someone in the open. Like those are all powerful things. I think that preventative health done well realizes on the time frame of decades, not weeks, not months, not even years. And I see all this quote unquote behavioral economics tricks as really powerful, but realizing more on the time frame of weeks and months, potentially years, not decades. Like I think that there needs to be maybe a global change in the way society thinks about this problem, and then it becomes the norm. Really changes of norms, rational shifts can bring us there.
That's an
Yeah,
easy one.
yeah, that's exactly. I mean, again, it is Max Planck that says the science proceed at the pace of funerals. Like, and I think a lot of things. I mean, it's a bit morbid as a quote, but I think a lot of things are like that, right? Like you just have to wait for the new generation to come up. It's just like there's no learning that can change the people that are there. You have to wait for new people with new norms, new values, new beliefs that replenish the world, and that you can build different products for those people.
I mean, we're talking about a new paradigm, and probably we can't expect it to happen fast. But at the same time, we have to stimulate it a lot, I guess, to happen. So before you said you basically had and have still to pay users to be engaged on the platform of Evidation. And you said that actually the model relies on something else. What did you discover over the years?
So we discovered over the years that pharma has no idea about how people using their products and drugs live with that drug. I mean, we know what's called efficacy from clinical trial perspective. So clinical trials are very well designed, specific experiments. Usually they're randomized control trials is the gold standard, which means you give to someone a drug, to someone else a placebo. They don't get to know which one they get. And then in the end of the period, you measure some difference on outcomes. For example, in GLP-1 drugs, the outcome will be weight loss. Great. Mm-hmm. We have that measure, and predicated on those results, we approve things to go to market. Regulatory bodies use that kind of data to say, okay, this is safe. First of all, it's safe, and that it's effective, like it actually does change the outcome. Then yes, it can go to market. But the reality of life is a lot more nuanced. Like, what kind of side effects do you have? How hard is it to get that drug? Is it covered by insurance? What if you are in a rural settings versus in a city setting? Like all this, things that are really driving how people use that drug in the real world. Why do they choose as consumer to go from one to another? And the choice is never directed. It needs to be mediated by a doctor, obviously, that prescribes, but it comes from the patient that says, hey, I cannot tolerate this, or hey, this is too expensive, or hey, this doesn't get shipped to my pharmacy, local pharmacy. All that nebulous set of soft things that really drive sales is unknown to pharma, fundamentally. And so we thought that having direct access to patients that understand that their data is being taken care of with the highest standard of privacy, is owned by them, could enable this conversation where we could go to patient and say, hey, this pharma company wants to understand more how you deal with your migraines, if you're taking any medication about it, and what are the side effects, and what are the changes in your sleep. And by the way, you don't have to tell me the changes on your sleep. You can connect your Fitbit and I can read it from there. And, everything is above the table, right? What data is being used for what reason, consent with dynamics over time. We remind you when we want you to stop sharing data. And this transparency really engenders trust. And then you can create data packages for, pharma and life science that are finally patient-centric. You hear about this word patient-centric all the time, and right? But who actually goes directly to patient? Very few. Who goes directly to patient and asks, hey, how do you feel? Very few, right? Because that connection is not made. Because, a drug company builds drugs, doesn't even can in some states talk directly to the patient. So that feedback loop that in a product, in tech, is the bread and butter of how you develop the product, right? You put something out there, you get feedback, you change it, you go, oh, this is not liked. Okay, people drop off. That doesn't happen in drug development, right? So we thought we could enable some of that, and it has been fairly successful.
That's very interesting. In Europe, people don't trust pharma in general. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if in the States this is different. How was the reaction? I know you were very transparent, and that's a different value proposition, but still you're talking to stakeholders which, don't have the best reputation sometimes.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a dance that you have to dance. You have to be transparent. in both sides, like let the patient know that if they join this study and they maybe get a gift card for that, it is because this data is going to be used in this way by this actor for the purpose of that, approving that kind of question. So that already builds a lot of trust. Like if you're not okay with that, if you're not okay with the institution or with the purpose, you say, no, I just use my evidation for my health goals, but the data doesn't go into this study. I think another thing that helps is that having the patient know that if you do close this loop, your next iteration of the drug is going to be better for you, right? Like you are going to help these people that you might not like, I understand that, building better product, because ultimately the incentive is aligned. Pharma does want to build better product. Pharma cares about patients, like in a way that a lot of time gets filtered by interest of different side, and not everyone is like that at pharma. Of course, there pharma as many heads, and so some of those might be seen as more market oriented and greedy, but the vast majority of folks that work at pharma deeply cares about the patient. And again, like if you build something that creates awful side effects, even if it passed the clinical trial, people eventually will stop taking it. Therefore, doctor will stop prescribing it. Therefore, pharma will stop selling it. So there is alignment of incentives in trying to create better experience around drug. Doesn't mean necessarily change the formulation, but maybe create a companion app that helps you understand how to use it. What is the best time to take it? Like what is the best way to signal to your doctor that things are not going well? So if you do take the time to explain that, if people understand that that's your ultimate goal, that engenders trust even more so.
Do you think this model could apply also to Europe? Better said, I do know many startups actually that do something similar to what you do, which is just transferring data to pharma companies for better pharmaceutical products, being very transparent to users, and that you can do through the Evidation app, but also through a chatbot, through like many different ways. I know that they sometimes face many difficulties in Europe, both for regulatory issues or for just commercial, deals. I'm just wondering if you have a view and an opinion about if there's some major differences between the States and Europe, and also if you see this just as a pharma play, or if you think there are also other ways we can, just start this positive flow, this virtuous cycle that you just described.
Yeah. Well, so many thoughts there. As you say, like the whole, from a 30,000 feet view, if you squint, like this space is tainted because it feels like data goes to pharma bad. Okay. So you really have to spend time to qualify that the way that data gets to pharma is not the way, you see in some cases, maybe hospital packaging up their data and selling it to pharma behind the back of patient that don't even know that is happening. And then maybe it's used against them, or maybe they're sold to insurance company, and that will create an increase in premium on the patient. Like it could be so dystopian. I mean, it's kind of like surfing. Like I use surfing, a half a meter wave here at a better beach in front of my house, which is, fun and family friendly, or are you surfing 100-foot wave in Nazaré? Like that's both surfing, but they're completely different experience. So I think part of it is just like education and qualification of what you're doing, and understanding that the patient is aware at any point in time where the data is and what it does, and can revoke that consent at all times. And this is in line with the GDPR regulation as well. I think there's, though, to your point, there's huge ecosystem barriers in Europe, right? Like if you pitch something like that to a VC is going to be like, this is not the place where to do this. I'm not going to fund you. So, your challenges are gonna come from more the ecosystem around you that is turned against this idea that any sorts of data that goes back to pharma from the patient is bad by definition. I haven't worked in Europe as much in the last 2 or 3 years, but before we were trying to do things in Europe, I think barriers are all around there. Like we talk a lot about regulation and GDPR. Sure, that's one barrier, but if you understand well GDPR, there are exemptions specific about research cases that actually make some of these use cases we talk about easier than in the US.
Okay.
GDPR itself is not the issue. The issue is that the ecosystem is not ready for this flow of data. There is distrust at all levels. There is a little bit of technophobia, quite frankly, in many countries. There was this example in a country that is not Italy, that I'm not going to name, where just like by having an app as a data collection got got immediately blocked because it means that you're selling the data to Google. And like, what are we talking about here, right? And so that's, again, maybe things have changed in the last 2 or 3 years. Things will definitely get better, right?
Are you saying that is cultural then? What do you mean as ecosystem? Why would a VC say no to you? Is it really because of culture and thoughts, or is it something more?
I think if I go back and replay the Evidation playbook in my head, I could see at least 10 decision points where, in Europe, it would have been harder to do what we've done, and not because of legality or even just like perceived legality. It's just, again, the level of trust that needed to build to do those things. Even just purely having a population as large as Evidation, 5 million Americans. Okay, so there's like 350 million Americans overall. So 5 million is, a little more than 1% of the total population. Like in Europe, that's a big number, right?
It is.
Right. And, countries are very loosely interoperable with each other from a healthcare perspective. So that means that you have to get 5 million people. That enables a lot of like research, for example, in rare disease that you cannot get at 1 million people or 100,000 people. You have to get them from a single country. But then it becomes a significant fraction of a single country in Europe. So that's, for example, a thing that, I would call like an ecosystem barrier there, that the scale of a product in health in Europe needs to be first developed within silos, within single countries, and maybe you never get to critical mass to enable the use that I described earlier as you would get to the United States.
I can totally imagine that. I would just think that maybe the pharma play would be easier in the sense that you have international pharma players that maybe go across borders, since the GDPR is also in theory across borders.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe it isn't from what you're saying, or maybe a bit easier, but not as much as needed.
I don't know. I also, don't want to be too much of a downer on Europe. I think it's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem. Like if you are based in the United States, you have the largest market in the world in your home turf. So the attention that you get to dedicate to anything outside of it is very limited. If then there is any, obstacle that arises early on, as it's been for us, then you're going to be like, okay, cool. We stay here.
You definitely stumbled on an opportunity, as you said at the beginning, in starting in the States, for sure. Maybe I would just jump to your present. And you said that you're trying to target an even bigger problem to what you were doing with the dividation. What do you mean with that?
Yeah, so we've all been seeing what's been happening in the AI world, right? Like we woke up a day, it was like November 30th, 2022, and now we have thinking machines that you can chat with, and they can write poems, in the rhyme of Snoop Dogg's, and you're like, what is happening here? And I'm an AI researcher, so I'm a computer scientist PhD, and I've kept doing AI researches and publishing it. And I've really seen how in a place where data is highly available, like it is for text and images, we have, the ChatGPT and the DALL-E of the world. Why do we have that? Because we have 2 trillion tokens or words from the web that we can train this model on, trying to predict the next token. Somehow, magically, at some point, this model understands language, and then, we can do all the things we've seen with the GPTs. These incredible tools are predicated on high availability of data, period. Okay. So the reason why we have ChatGPT, we don't have yet tumor GPT, is because you don't have a sequencing tumor banks of all people in the world out there for grab. For better or worse, I'm not trying to say that the data that OpenAI is used in the right way. That there might be copyright issues there, and that we need to be very serious about. So maybe it is a mistake that is so open from a legal perspective. But the reality is, you need a very large amount of data to start building body of knowledge that could be actionable and bring the results that we have seen in the text and image world. And so I wouldn't have that in health. And in health, data is very siloed, is very fragmented. When it's generated, mostly is kept by the generator to either publish a paper, or because they have this feeling that there's quote unquote sitting on oil, although they don't have any other way to monetize it. And so we never get the chance to have largest amount of data that go into the same model or into the same analysis to create the amazing tools that we have seen in other modalities. And so that's what we're trying to do at Sage. We are working with data generators to help them share the data in an open science way. We run a very large platform that's called Synapse that has more than 3.5 petabytes of omics data. If you are a researcher generating primary data because of your research question, or you're a hospital generating primary data because of care, you can share it there under controlled access. So we have a governance team that makes sure that the sharing is done in a way that protects the privacy of the patients. And then whoever wants to use it comes to us with a purpose of use, saying, I want to build a better drug, or I want to train an AI model. If that purpose matches the informed consent or the data use agreement from the generator, we release the data to them, and they can use it. But also, we promote this data. We build search engines on top of data. It's really hard to search for data because data, again, is in silos. We're really trying to bootstrap this ecosystem of data generators and data users meeting and create more bang for the buck. That's what Sage is trying to solve. I have a lot of AI researchers frustrated coming to me and say, hey, I would love to work in health. It's so purposeful, but there is no data out there. And I'm like, no, there is. You just don't know where to find it, and I'm going to help you find it.
That's super inspirational. I have a prediction to ask you, which is, in how much time do you think we're going to have enough data for whatever will be the next tool?
So I think it's happening. Like I'm starting seeing GPT moments in health. There are large foundation models that are called like this, models that are multimodalities, heavily pre-trained, and we're starting seeing it on the DNA, RNA, and protein. There was just a model released a week ago called Evo2, which is the largest biological model ever released, can generate DNA that is as close to mammals as possible, and that allows you to start studying genetic diseases and like how to target specific genes. And so by creating this genetic sequences, researcher can better understand how to treat those sequences when they go awry. There are foundation models now that are built with pathology slides. So cancer slide picture taken that show how advanced or how heterogeneous it is now are all been put into these models, and this model understand how to detect cancer, how to stage it better, and how to propose treatment options of that. I haven't seen a lot deployed into the clinics yet, like going back to the patient, but there are pilots on that already, at least here in the United States, that are happening. And the value is huge, right? Like we are seeing that these things do recognize tumors better than doctors. And so there is a real value and a real reason to adopt this as soon as possible. Obviously, there's hallucinations, so a human has to be in the loop, but we've understood that piece, right? Like when nobody's saying anymore these things are going to be automatically doing the treatment for you. There's always going to be a human using them, but the value is just too much to pass on.
This is so exciting. To be honest, you're possibly working on the most useful thing that society needs. And honestly, this gives me a lot of hope also for healthcare in general, because we are in a such complicated moment, and it will be more complicated as we go on. So I think it's really, really exciting. The fact that you're already seeing results. Thank you for being here. I think it was very inspirational. I'll be very curious to see your next step as Sage and at whatever comes after that.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun, and anytime, and good luck with your endeavors.
Thanks a lot.